There is my fiancé, the one I've been telling you all about.
Kin-soo announced, his deep voice slicing through the tense silence of the rooftop penthouse. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, a stack of interior design portfolios clutched to her chest like a shield. She had only been looking for the venue manager to pitch her luxury estate staging business, but a wrong turn through the double doors had landed her smack in the middle of a private, high-stakes family dinner. Before she could even process the glamorous socialite staring at her with pure venom, the towering, notoriously ruthless tech-shipping tycoon Kin-soo was already walking toward her. His dark, intense eyes locked onto hers with a commanding, silent plea that told her exactly what was happening. He was trapped, cornered by his traditional grandfather to choose a bride or forfeit his entire global empire. And Rachel's accidental entrance was his only escape hatch. Rachel opened her mouth to fiercely deny it, her independent spirit flaring at the sheer arrogance of being used as a corporate prop. But before she could speak, Kin-soo closed the distance, his hand smoothly finding her waist. The heat of his touch sent a jolt straight down her spine, and the sheer desperation behind his cold executive mask stopped the words in her throat. "You're late, darlin'," Kin-soo murmured, his voice a smooth, captivating purr that completely commanded the room. He leaned down, his expensive, sharp cologne enveloping her senses as his lips brushed her cheek, whispering a breathless promise against her skin. "Play along. I will pay you, or we both ruin our lives right here." Looking into the eyes of the most dangerous billionaire in the city, Rachel realized her chaotic morning had just turned into a high-stakes game of survival, and she had just become the counterfeit fiancé. Rachel spun around so fast her heels nearly skidded on the polished rooftop tile. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she made a hard line for the glass double doors. Nope. Absolutely not. What the heck is happening? Exit game. She was an interior designer with a lot to deal with right now, not an actress, and she certainly wasn't about to be thrown into a crazy game to become a sacrificial lamb in some billionaire's twisted family psychodrama. She turned to leave immediately via the same way she had just come in, but before she could leave, two massive shadows materialized on the other side of the glass. Two suit-clad security guards stepped into her path, their expressions as unyielding as granite, arms folded firmly over their chests. They didn't touch her, but their sheer physical presence blocked the exit completely, trapping her inside the penthouse. "Out of the way," Rachel hissed, throwing a sharp glare over her shoulder at the man who had just dismantled her entire morning. Behind her, the penthouse was in absolute chaos. The traditional grandfather had risen from his seat, his face twisted in a mask of thunderous shock, while the three jilted socialites practically vaporized Rachel with their eyes as they rushed out the side exit, muttering furious insults about low-class trash. Within 2 minutes the room cleared out, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Kin-soo didn't look panicked. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks with the methodical, chilling precision of a man who had just successfully executed a hostile corporate takeover. When he finally looked up, his dark eyes pinned Rachel to the spot. "Let me out of here right now," Rachel demanded, clutching her design portfolios tightly against her chest like armor. "I came up here to pitch a staging contract to the venue manager, not to be a prop in your pathetic little marriage trap. Tell your cavemen to step aside." Kin-soo walked toward her, each step slow, measured, and radiating an overwhelming sense of power. "The venue manager reports to me, miss," he said, his deep voice carrying a smooth, velvety authority that made her skin prickle. He stopped just inches away, completely eclipsing her with his height. "And right now, you and I have a much bigger contract to discuss." "I don't sign contracts with arrogant dictators. I don't even know you," she snapped, her stubborn pride flaring. Kin-soo let out a low chuckle. "You will want to sign this one. I know it's random, but you will love the stakes involved." "Take her to the office to wait for me," he said, gesturing to the guards blocking her way. They did as instructed. "Give me a minute, family," Kin-soo said, turning to the still shocked people seated. "My fiancée is a bit shaken up because this was a surprise for her." He entered the room to see a fuming Rachel. Before she could say anything, he began, "Play my fiancé for exactly 4 weeks. Attend the family dinners. Show up at the media galas and convince my grandfather that I am settling down so I can secure my permanent appointment as CEO. He leaned in closer, his sharp, expensive cologne wrapping around her senses. In exchange, I will wire $500,000 to your firm's account by noon today, and $1 million directly to your account after it is all over. Rachel's breath hitched, but she forced a cold laugh, her fierce independence kicking into overdrive. What madness is this? You think you can just buy me? I've spent the last 3 years building my design business from scratch without a single handout, and I'm damn sure not starting now. Keep your charity, sir. I earn my money. She turned back to the door, slamming her palm against it. Open the door! Kinsu didn't move to stop her. Instead, he slipped his hands into his trouser pockets, his voice dropping into a devastatingly calm register. Rachel Williams, is it? A commendable attitude, truly. It's a shame your bank doesn't share your sentiment. Vanguard Logistics canceled their multi-million-dollar estate staging account with you yesterday morning, didn't they? Which means by next Friday you won't even have enough liquidity to cover payroll for your 15 employees. Rachel froze, her blood turning to absolute ice. She slowly turned around, her face pale but her eyes blazing with fury. How do you know that? I have my ways, plus I know everything about the companies that operate in my buildings, Kinsu said simply, stepping forward until he was looking down into her eyes. He didn't look smug. He looked intensely focused, treating her not like a victim, but like an adversary. He respected. I know you're proud. I know you'd rather sink with your ship than take a handout. But if you walk out that door right now, your employees lose their livelihoods and everything you built goes under. Work for me for 30 days. Save your firm. Protect your people. What is your pride worth compared to that? Rachel stared at him, her chest heaving as a brutal war raged inside her. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to tell this billionaire to go to hell. She hated his arrogance, hated his wealth, and hated how easily he had backed her into a corner. But as the faces of her design team flashed through her mind, the people who had trusted her, who had families to feed, the stubborn wall around her heart cracked just enough. 1 month, Rachel whispered, her voice tight, dangerous, and dripping with venom. And the moment that 30 days is up, I am wiping your existence from my memory. Mr. Kinsu, he replied, his lips curved into a faint, dark smirk that sent a terrifying shiver straight down her spine. Deal, partner. The Vance estate was less of a home and more of a sprawling fortress of glass, steel, and hyper-modern minimalism. By Friday evening, Rachel found herself standing in the center of the eastern guest wing, staring at a bedroom that was easily 3 times the size of her entire apartment. The automated smart blinds slid open at her approach, revealing a panoramic view of the city skyline, but the cold, sterile perfection of the space only made her jaw tighten. She wasn't a guest here. She was an asset under contract. Dumping her duffel bag onto the pristine white Italian leather sofa, she pulled a legal pad and a heavy black marker from her tote bag. If she was going to survive 30 days in this billionaire's gilded cage, she needed boundaries, and she needed them written in stone. 10 minutes later, she marched down the floating glass staircase to the main living area, where Kinsu sat at a monolithic marble island, tracking global shipping data on a sleek, transparent tablet. He didn't look up when she entered, but the subtle shift in his posture told her he knew exactly when she stepped into the room. Slapping your heels against the floor won't make the contract end any faster, Rachel, Kinsu murmured, his deep voice cutting through the quiet hum of the estate's climate control. We need to talk about the rules of engagement, Rachel said, tossing the legal pad onto the marble surface right over his digital screen. Kinsu slowly raised his eyes, his dark gaze tracking from the paper up to her face. A faint, mocking amusement twitched at the corner of his lips. Rules? I am the one who cut the check, Miss Williams. Usually I dictate the terms. You dictate your shipping empire, but you don't dictate me, Rachel countered, leaning her hands on the counter to meet him at eye level. Rule number 1. Absolute physical boundaries. No unscripted touching. No hand-holding unless we are actively standing in front of your grandfather or a camera lens, and absolutely no entering my wing of the house without explicit permission. Kinsu leaned back, folding his arms across his broad chest. Reasonable enough. Go on. Rule number 2, interference with my actual business, she continued, pointing the marker at him. My design team operates independently. You do not look at my clients, you do not manipulate my accounts, and you do not use your massive wealth to fix my company's problems behind my back. I pull my own weight. Kinsu's eyes narrowed slightly, the amusement fading into a calculating stare. And rule number 3? Rule number 3 is non-negotiable, Rachel said, her voice dropping into a fierce, unwavering register. You do not try to change me. I am not going to turn into one of your muted, silent corporate socialites who nod and smile on command. I wear what I want, I say what I think, and I will not shrink myself to fit into your stuffy high society world. Kinsu let out a soft, dangerous chuckle that vibrated in the space between them. He stood up, his massive frame completely towering over her, but Rachel refused to take a single step back. You have an impressive amount of fire, Rachel, he said, stepping around the counter until he was close enough that she could smell the sharp, expensive cedar wood of his cologne. But high society isn't just stuffy. It's a shark tank. The media, my family, my competitors, they will tear you apart looking for a fracture in our story. You think you can maintain that loud, stubborn independence under a microscope? Within a week, the pressure will have you begging to follow a script. Rachel tilted her chin up, a defiant, razor-sharp smile cutting across her face. You think pressure breaks me? Honey, I built a business from nothing in an industry that eats outsiders alive. You think you're the most dangerous thing in this city because you own a few ships? Try me. If you think I'm going to fold, I promise you right now, Kinsu, I'm about to become your absolute worst nightmare. Kinsu stared down at her, his expression completely unreadable, though a spark of genuine, dark intrigue flared deep within his eyes. We'll see, he murmured. Welcome to the estate, fiancé. The confrontation began at precisely 10 o'clock Saturday morning when a sleek, silver rolling rack was pushed into Rachel's suite by a woman who looked like she chewed glass for breakfast. Her name was Miss Kyo Kinsu's head of executive image, and her expression was completely devoid of human warmth. Mr. Kinsu's fiancé must project an aura of understated corporate dignity, Ms. Cho announced, gesturing to the rack. We've curated a selection of long-skirt suits with simple, expensive accessories. Rachel walked over, flipping through the hangers with a look of profound disgust. It looked like a wardrobe designed for a high-security funeral. Silent luxury? Honey, this looks like a silent cry for help. If I wear this much beige, I will literally blend into your microfiber walls and disappear. This is the standard for the Vance family, the assistant replied coldly. You are expected to conform. Then the Vance family is going to have to adjust their expectations, Rachel said, flashing a sweet, dangerous smile as she pushed the entire silver rack straight out into the hallway. Tell Kinsu I'll handle my own styling. For their first public appearance, a high-stakes charity gala celebrating the launch of a new global shipping terminal, Rachel decided to give the high society sharks exactly what they weren't expecting. She bypassed the boring corporate uniform and went straight for a jaw-dropping, structurally flawless, shimmering gown in electric deep red that perfectly complemented her radiant skin tone. The dress featured a daring, asymmetrical neckline and a sharp slit that showed off her heels. It wasn't a silent luxury, it was a loud royal declaration. Downstairs in the grand foyer, Kinsu stood waiting by the double glass doors, checking his watch with his usual icy impatience. He was dressed in a pristine, custom-tailored black tuxedo that made him look like a lethal weapon. Hearing the whisper of silk against the floating staircase, he glanced up, ready to give his fake fiancée a lecture about punctuality. The words died completely in his throat. Kinsu froze, his dark eyes instantly locking onto Rachel as she glided down the stairs. The absolute confidence radiating from her was magnetic. The bold, emerald green cut through the sterile, minimalist aesthetic of his mansion like a lightning bolt, and the sharp, defiant tilt of her chin proved she wasn't hiding behind his name. For a solid 10 seconds, the billionaire CEO couldn't breathe. You're staring, partner, Rachel murmured, a brilliant, teasing spark in her eyes as she reached the bottom step and smoothly slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. Is my aura not understated enough for you? Kin-soo swallowed hard, his fingers tightening against hers as he felt the electric warmth of her touch through his suit jacket. He had spent his entire life controlling every single variable in his corporate empire, but looking down at the fierce, breathtaking woman beside him, he realized he had absolutely no control over this. Rachel wasn't just playing along with his script, she was completely running the show. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a shimmering sea of glass, heavy tuxedos and flashing diamond necklaces. But the most blinding light came from the red carpet outside. The moment the sleek black limousine pulled up and Kin-soo stepped out, a deafening roar erupted from the wall of paparazzi. When he turned and extended a hand to guide Rachel out of the vehicle, the camera flashes merged into a single continuous explosion of white light. Smile, darling, Kin-soo murmured, his voice barely a breath against her ear as he pulled her flush against his side. His large hand settled firmly on the bare skin of her lower back, sending an immediate spike of electricity straight up her spine. The vultures are watching. I'm smiling, Rachel whispered back through perfectly grit teeth, her lips curved into a flawless, dazzling expression. But if your hand goes 1 inch lower, I'm going to introduce my emerald heel to your Italian leather shoes. As they crossed the threshold into the main gala, the scrutiny only intensified. Standing at the VIP balcony overlooking the crowd was Kin-soo's grandfather, Chairman Vance. The old man's piercing, unblinking eyes followed Rachel's every movement like a hawk, evaluating prey. He had already sent 2 corporate investigators to look into her background, and tonight was the ultimate stress test. To survive the night, Kin-soo had to act like a man completely consumed by love. And to Rachel's absolute shock, the ruthless, ice-cold CEO was a terrifyingly good actor. When a waiter approached with a silver tray, Kin-soo intercepted him before Rachel could even reach out. He picked up a champagne glass, handing it to her with a soft, knowing look. This will help you relax after the long day you had, he said smoothly, loud enough for a nearby reporter from Vogue Corporate to overhear. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. You notice that? I notice everything about you, Rachel, he murmured, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that felt entirely too real to be scripted. Throughout the night, they were cornered by elite board members and old money snobs trying to trip Rachel up. But every time a high society matriarch threw a passive-aggressive insult about her independent design background, Rachel fired back with a sharp, lightning-fast roast wrapped in a sweet smile. Instead of checking her, Kin-soo threw his head back and laughed. A genuine, deep, rumbling sound that Rachel had never heard before. He leaned in, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, playing the part of the smitten billionaire so perfectly that the surrounding media practically went wild, furiously typing notes about the unprecedented romance of the shipping tycoon. The faked chemistry between them was so electric it practically set the ballroom on fire. But the real danger began after midnight when the heavy oak doors of the Vance estate finally closed behind them, shutting out the world. The silence of the massive foyer was deafening. Rachel slipped off her heels, leaning against the cold marble pillar, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Kin-soo stood just 2 feet away, loosening his silk bow tie with a slow, deliberate movement. The public performance was over, but neither of them moved to break the distance. Kin-soo looked down at her, his gaze dropping to her lips before rising back to her eyes. The cold executive mask didn't return. Instead, a heavy, suffocating heat filled the space between them. You did exceptionally well tonight, Kin-soo said, his voice dropping into a rough, low register that sent a shiver straight down her arms. Yeah, well, we both did, Rachel whispered, suddenly finding it incredibly hard to breathe. The boundaries they had written on that legal pad felt miles away. Standing in the quiet dark of his home, she realized with a wave of absolute terror that the faked chemistry from the gala wasn't a performance anymore. It was turning into a reality. She had no idea how to stop. By Tuesday afternoon, Rachel had temporarily converted a sleek glass table in the corner of Kim Soo's massive executive penthouse office into her personal design studio. While Kim Soo was downstairs anchoring an emergency board meeting, she was surrounded by fabric swatches, blueprint printouts, and rendering sketches for her company's upcoming projects. The steady, quiet hum of the executive floor was peaceful until the heavy double doors of the adjacent private boardroom clicked open and closed. Rachel didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was a secretary, until she heard a sharp, hushed voice slicing through the quiet space. "I told you the media is buying the story completely. We have to move the timeline up," the voice hissed. Rachel froze, a premium velvet swatch hovering in her hand. She recognized that voice instantly. It belonged to Min Ho, Kim Soo's deeply envious cousin. Min Ho was the family's golden boy who had been next in line for the shipping empire CEO title until Kim Soo suddenly announced his surprise engagement to Rachel. Creeping silently toward the frosted glass partition that separated the main office from the boardroom, Rachel peered through a small, clear design gap in the paneling. Min Ho was pacing frantically, his face twisted in a predatory, desperate grimace as he gripped his phone. "The grandfather completely believes they're in love," Min Ho whispered harshly into the receiver, his knuckles turning white. "If the board finalizes Kim Soo's permanent appointment next week, we lose everything. We strike now. I've already copied his private digital logs and the original terms of their arrangement from the estate's secondary server." Rachel's blood turned to absolute ice. Her sharp, professional eye for detail instantly locked onto the heavy, encrypted flash drive Min Ho was transferring from his pocket into a secure briefcase bearing the logo of Triton Global, Kim Soo's most ruthless corporate rival. "We leaked the private data and the fraud exposure at the family summit," Min Ho sneered into the phone, a smug, venomous smile cutting across his face. "When the media and the grandfather see that this perfect little engagement is nothing but a paid corporate scam, Kim Soo's reputation will be entirely obliterated. The board will have no choice but to strip him of his title and hand the company to me." Min Ho snapped the briefcase shut with a heavy, resounding click, completely unaware that the woman he was plotting to destroy was standing just feet away, recording his final words on her phone. He hurried out the boardroom's side exit, leaving a suffocating tension in the air. Rachel stood frozen, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. This wasn't just a corporate game anymore. It was a total demolition plot. If Min Ho leaked that data, Kim Soo would lose his life's work. Her own design firm would be dragged through the mud as a fraudulent accessory, and the fragile, terrifyingly real bond growing between them would be shattered before it even had a chance to begin. The snake was officially in the boardroom, and Rachel knew she was the only one who could cut off its head. A fierce summer storm slammed into the estate shortly after midnight, driving sheets of torrential rain against the towering glass walls and causing the distant skyline to flicker under jagged forks of lightning. Upstairs in her suite, Rachel couldn't sleep. The weight of the recorded conversation burning a hole in her phone was too heavy. Clutching the device tightly, she slipped out of her room and navigated the dimly lit, cavernous corridors of the eastern wing, tracking a faint amber glow down to Kim Soo's private study. She pushed the heavy oak door open without knocking. Kim Soo was illuminated only by the rhythmic flash of lightning and the soft embers of a dying fireplace. He sat frozen at his desk, staring blankly out at the raging storm, a glass of amber scotch untouched beside him. The absolute suffocating silence radiating from him was heavy. "Kim Soo," Rachel murmured softly, stepping into the room. He didn't startle, but his jaw clenched as he looked up. "Rachel, it's late. You should be asleep." "You have a snake in your house," she said flatly, walking across the room and placing her phone directly onto the desk. Without another word, she pressed play. Min Ho's venomous, hushed voice filled the quiet study, detailing the corporate espionage, the stolen digital logs, and the cold plot to completely obliterate Kim Soo's life's work at the upcoming family summit. As the recording played, Rachel kept her eyes fixed on Kim Soo. She expected him to explode with executive fury or immediately call his security team. Instead, she watched a raw, devastating wave of betrayal wash over his features. His shoulders subtly dropped, and for a split second, the terrifyingly powerful billionaire looked entirely hollowed out. When the recording ended, Kim-soo didn't move. He simply stared at the blank screen. "I grew up with him," Kim-soo whispered, his deep voice carrying a rough, cracking edge that pierced straight through Rachel's chest. "I built this entire shipping empire to protect this family, to secure our legacy. And yet, every single person in my circle is just waiting for the perfect moment to slip a knife between my ribs for a percentage of the valuation." In that quiet, storm-soaked moment, the illusion of the arrogant tycoon was completely shattered. Rachel looked at him and didn't see a ruthless billionaire. She saw a profoundly lonely man trapped inside a gilded fortress, surrounded by predators who only valued his bank account. "Is that why you built this place?" Rachel asked, softly, stepping closer. "Why do you act like an unfeeling machine?" Kim-soo let out a low, humorless chuckle, finally looking up at her. "If you don't show any blood, Rachel, the sharks don't know where to bite. The cold exterior isn't a personality, it's a shield." Rachel stared down into his dark, vulnerable eyes and felt her own stubborn, hyper-independent emotional defenses violently cracking. For weeks, she had sworn she was his worst nightmare, protecting her heart behind sarcasm and strict contract rules. But looking at the real man hiding behind the frozen CEO mask, she realized with a wave of absolute terror that she didn't want to run away anymore. She was falling for him, completely and entirely. The grand mahogany boardroom of the Vance corporate headquarters was suffocatingly tense. The annual family summit had reached its climax, and Chairman Vance stood at the head of the monolithic table, a heavy leather-bound resolution in his hands meant to finalize Kim-soo's permanent appointment as global CEO. Kim-soo sat with flawless executive poise, his fingers casually locked, while Rachel sat beside him, her spine perfectly straight. "If there are no objections," the grandfather announced, his piercing eyes scanning the room, "we will proceed with the signing." "I object," a sharp, venomous voice sliced through the room. Min-ho stood up from the far end of the table, a malicious, triumphant smirk tearing across his face. He slammed a thick manila folder onto the center of the table, throwing a wireless remote control forward. Instantly, the massive projector screen behind the chairman flashed to life, displaying a series of high-resolution surveillance photos. Rachel's breath caught. It was the legal pad from their first night, the written list of boundaries, and photos of her moving her duffel bag specifically into the isolated eastern guest wing. "This entire engagement is an absolute corporate fraud!" Min-ho shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Kim-soo didn't find a fiancé. He hired a desperate, failing interior designer and paid her $500,000 to act a part so he could trick this board and steal the CEO title. She is nothing but a paid actress." The boardroom instantly erupted into utter chaos. Shareholders gasped, family members whispered furiously, and a wave of shock rippled through the executive line. Min-ho stood there, gloating, looking down at Kim-soo like he had finally delivered the killing blow. Chairman Vance's face turned into a thunderous mask of pure rage. He slammed his fist against the mahogany table, a sound like a gunshot that instantly silenced the room. The old man turned his lethal, unblinking gaze entirely onto Kim-soo and Rachel, his chest heaving. "Is this true?" the chairman demanded, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly low, guttural register. He stared directly at Rachel, stripping away all corporate diplomatic shields. "I have tolerated the media circus because I believed my grandson had finally found a partner to anchor his life. I will not have this family's legacy turned into a cheap theatrical production for the press. If this woman is truly your fiancé and not some hired asset, I want proof right here, right now. Prove to this board that this relationship is real, or the appointment is void, and you are stripped of your title permanently." Min-ho's smirk widened as he folded his arms, waiting for the final collapse. Rachel could feel the collective weight of the entire Vance empire pressing down on Kim-soo's shoulders. The trap had been sprung perfectly, and they were completely cornered. Kinsey began to stand, his broad shoulders squaring as he prepared to shoulder the entire blame, alone to shield Rachel from the impending corporate fallout. But before he could utter a word, Rachel stepped past him. She didn't look at the fraudulent contract documents or the hostile shareholders. Instead, she marched directly in front of him to address the board of executives. "You want proof?" Rachel's voice rang through the boardroom speakers, fierce, clear, and vibrating with an intensity that forced the entire room into a dead silence. "My name is Rachel Williams, and yes, I entered into a written contract with Kin Soo 30 days ago. I did it because I was proud, independent, and stubborn, and I needed to save my design firm from collapsing." Minho let out a triumphant laugh, but Rachel pinned him with a lethal look that cut his smirk short. "But what your little surveillance photos didn't capture, Minho, is what happened after that contract was signed," Rachel continued, turning her eyes to Chairman Vance. "You all look at Kin Soo and see a ruthless shipping tycoon, a cold machine who moves global fleets like chess pieces. But over the last month I saw who he really is when the cameras are off. I saw a man who carries the weight of this entire family on his back while everyone else just waits to slip a knife into it. I saw a man who operates with absolute integrity, who protects his people, and who is profoundly lonely because he is surrounded by snakes like your grandson." She looked back at Kin Soo, her chest heaving as the last of her emotional defenses completely dissolved. "The contract might have started as a fake corporate script, but my feelings for him are entirely real. He isn't a transaction to me, he is my partner." Rachel closed the distance between them and gripped the lapels of Kin Soo's custom tuxedo. She pulled him down and kissed him. It wasn't a calculated, polite public performance. It was a fierce, passionate, and emotionally raw declaration that shattered the boundaries of their original agreement right in front of the board and the live-streaming corporate media. Kin Soo froze for a fraction of a second before his hands locked around her waist, pulling her flush against him as he kissed her back with a desperate intensity. When they finally broke apart, the room was stunned. Rachel calmly plugged her phone into the central media console. Minho's recorded voice instantly filled the room, detailing his plot to leak the private data and collude with Triton Global. Chairman Vance's face turned from thunderous rage to cold disgust as he looked at Minho. "Security," the chairman barked. "Escort my grandson out of this building and call the police for corporate espionage." As a trembling Minho was dragged away, the chairman signed the permanent executive resolution, securing Kin Soo's empire for good. The click of the zipper closing on her duffel bag sounded final in the quiet space of the guest wing. Rachel looked around the room one last time. The automated blinds were open, the morning sun painting the sharp, minimalist lines of the estate in warm gold. Her 30 days were officially up. She felt a strange, tight ache in her chest, but she pushed it down, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. Her company's accounts were fully funded, her employees were safe, and she had survived the high society Shark Tank with her dignity intact. She had proven she didn't need a billionaire's handout to thrive. But as she walked down the floating glass staircase, the silence of the house felt less like peace and more like a heavy, suffocating weight. She was leaving with her independence, but she was leaving a massive piece of her heart behind. Rachel walked out into the crisp morning air, making her way down the long, winding driveway toward the massive iron gates of the estate where her rideshare was waiting. "Rachel, stop!" The deep, breathless command cut through the quiet morning. Rachel froze, turning around to see Kin Soo running down the driveway. His usual immaculate executive appearance was completely gone. His hair was unstyled, his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and he wasn't wearing a suit jacket. In his hand he was gripping a familiar piece of paper. "What are you doing, Kin Soo?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling slightly as she clutched her bag tighter. "Our month is over. The contract is fulfilled. Your empire is secure, and my company is safe. It's time for me to go back to my real life." Kin Soo stopped just inches away from her, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "I don't care about the 30 days, Rachel." "I do," she said softly, looking away. "I'm an independent woman, Kin Soo. I built my life from scratch. I am not going to stay here and become another piece of corporate branding for the Vance family. I'm not going to be a trophy wife hiding behind your wealth. Do you really think that's what I want? Kinsu asked, his dark eyes burning with an intense, raw emotion she had never seen before. Without another word, he raised the piece of paper in his hand, the original, legally binding fake fiancé contract, and tore it down the middle. He tore it again and again until the pieces fluttered to the asphalt between them like snow. Rachel gasped. Kinsu, what are you doing? I'm destroying the script, he said, stepping closer until the expensive, familiar scent of his cedarwood cologne completely enveloped her. He reached out, his large hands gently cupping her face, his thumb wiping away a stray tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I don't want a fake fiancé, Rachel. I don't want a calculated corporate merger, and I damn sure don't want a trophy wife who echoes my every word. He leaned down, his forehead resting gently against hers, his voice dropping into a rough, vulnerable whisper. I want you. I want the stubborn, brilliant, fiercely independent woman who walked into my office and called my lifestyle pathetic. I want the woman who wears electric green to a boring gala and completely runs the show. I want a completely unscripted, messy, unpredictable, real relationship with the only person in this world who ever dared to tell me the truth. Rachel's heart pounded violently against her ribs, the final walls around her heart completely shattering. She looked up into the eyes of the man who had traded his cold corporate shield for absolute vulnerability just to keep her from walking away. A real relationship is terrifying, Kinsu, she whispered, a brilliant emotional smile finally breaking across her face. There are no written rules, no legal boundaries. We actually have to talk about our problems. Kinsu let out a low, breathless chuckle, his lips brushing against hers. I think I can handle the challenge, partner. Try to keep up. He closed the remaining distance, kissing her with a deep, passionate finality that sealed a brand new, unwritten deal, one based entirely on true love.